The times of us getting incredible games are actually continuing because a game right now has got 98% on Steam, nearly 20,000 ratings, it's just came out, and it's called Hades. It is absolutely taking Steam by storm, and it's the latest game from Supergiant Games, who themselves are pretty incredible. It's just been doing so immensely well that we had to talk about it. Of course, it's just the latest in a long line of hits from that studio, so today, the whole point of this video is to work out what makes Hades so good, why are people playing it, why should you consider it, and how have Supergiant Games actually kept up this incredible streak. And speaking of streaks, I want you to start a streak of 1 by clicking that subscription button once, because if you make it a streak and click it twice, then it'll unsubscribe you again. But yes, we do lots of gaming content. We are moving to be a lot more game-focused these days, so if you're down for more of that, hit that sub button. Your support is always appreciated, and with that said, let's go. What is Hades, and what actually makes it so good? Well, put simply, Hades is a roguelite, and it's centered around you escaping from the Greek underworld, where you play as the son of Hades, as he of course embarks on an epic quest to essentially say, up yours dad, and well, move out, strike out on his own. Now, what's pretty cool is when you die, you go back to your bedroom, Hades laughs at you, and you sort of have to start again. And I would say that at that sort of core, it's a decently compelling nugget, but of course, it's a roguelike, and really, that's not a novel thing. It's not an underserved market, so we still have to work out what actually makes this game different. And overall, I would say the game makes itself different in 2 different ways. Way number 1 is that it is, well, very much front and center, a narrative game with characters. It has a lot of that. There's a lot of roguelike, absolutely, but there's a surprising amount of character work done for an entry in this genre. And that really is quite unusual, because usually in a roguelike, well, the story is mostly there to give the gameplay context. With this, though, it's pretty different. Each run actually introduces you to new characters and new interactions. You actually get to have a personality with your character. And I think that's actually a pretty welcome part to the roguelike gameplay loop. It's another reason to, well, keep on progressing. The second thing is quite an emphasis on rewarding attempted runs rather than punishing failed ones. So losing everything when you die is par for the course in this genre. Hades, though, implements something that has been done for quite some time. A game that comes to mind is Rogue Legacy 1 as an example, where of course it gives you permanent upgrades that are carried on from run to run. I think that's generally a good feature for games in that genre that are trying to do something a bit more contemporary. Now, of course, you have that going on, but you also have to add in how, of course, more characters and conversations become available with each run that you do. And that actually means that if you fail, yeah, it kind of sucks, but you can just start again, and you know that new run will actually give you some new interactions. And I think that really is playing on the inherent replayability of roguelikes in a way that actually brings the narrative on board too. It gives people a pretty good reason to go for another run. You know, a reason in addition to wanting a new build or a new item or to not make a mistake, and I think that's pretty cool. Then the third thing that I would say this game really does is execution. It executes on what it wants to do impeccably. The visual effects, like the VFX, the SFX, the music, the writing with the characters, the visuals, I mean, this game is goddamn gorgeous. I think that really is enough to be a third pillar of success for this game. I think it's just undeniably eye-grabbing. The second you see it in a trailer, it actually just stands out to you. And things like that are an extremely important force multiplier on any marketing spend or viral spread that a game has. They're really essential to viral spread. So I think those are the 3 things, mainly speaking, that have actually led to this being so damn successful. Of course, there is another less direct thing, and that is the fact that Hades has been in early access since 2018. And I think it's extremely clear that Supergiant have made the most of all of that time in early access. They have iterated on it, they've got the details sorted out. So simply put, it's a damn good game. It's an intriguing setting, Greek mythology. That's something that's pretty fun to explore in this way, so it's got that. It's got impactful gameplay. It's got really good progression. It's got smooth, stylish, impactful combat that is just really fun. It's also straightforward enough to make it accessible and easy to hop into, but it's deep enough to actually make it interesting and go the distance. You've got a multitude of weapons, techniques, buffs, and upgrades to make you feel powerful. And then, of course, you've got what's a little bit more unique feeling for this genre, which is the engaging characters, the various different gods and legends that you actually encounter as you go through it, which kind of gives you this like sense of shared history that I think is pretty cool. And even Hades himself is surprisingly likable. Like, he's actually a pretty compelling guy to have in this game. You know, he's not just your straightforward villain that you find in most roguelikes. You know, every sort of flash of like smug superiority belies a sort of affection for his upstart son, you, which I think is quite engaging, and I think then also Hades just being a little bit exhausted with his job of governing the underworld. So yes, it's a good core character interaction, right? Hades, you know, his impatience and his sarcasm kind of clashing with your youthful arrogance. It works pretty well. So to put that together, it has succeeded in setting gameplay, narrative, presentation, business model as well, and that means it's no surprise that it's got a 98% on Steam. I mean, what gets 98%? That is absolutely incredible. But that said, I'm not as surprised because this is Supergiant Games, and that's why it's time for us to talk a little bit about history. Supergiant Games was founded in 2009 by a couple of ex-EA devs. Of course, their debut game was Bastion. Came out in 2011, and I loved that game. Wow. Then Transistor, released in 2014. The fact that that's 2014 makes me feel bizarre and old because I remember that thing like it's new. It, of course, number one, gorgeous music, gorgeous art, and I would say as well, pretty unique core gameplay loop going on with the sort of freezing time stuff. It was overall a really solid game. I enjoyed it a lot. And then moving on 3 years, we've got Pyre, which came out in 2017, and it's a bizarre creation. I mean, it's essentially a story-driven 3v3 basketball simulator based around returning exiled souls to glory through a liberation ritual. That might sound very wacky, but the game is incredibly well received, even though it's not one that I've got around to playing, and the core there basically seems to be unique, fun gameplay combined with Supergiant's deepest story, and of course, their, as always, incredible presentation. And you really do see their hallmarks as a studio, right? Unique, engaging core gameplay loops with beautiful presentation, like from the graphical side of things. Incredible music, usually an isometric perspective, a strong narrative focus, and just absolute top-notch voice acting. And on top of all that, they've really shown themselves to be willing to experiment, right? Their games have all been pretty different to each other, even though it's mostly been isometric games, right? They all look like Supergiant games, but they all have got quite a progression. Overall, it's an incredible situation. Now, that is a lot of their past and a lot of context. Let's now talk about the process of bringing Hades to market. Very much unlike its predecessors, Hades had a lengthy early access period, where basically Supergiant designed this game from the ground up with early access in mind, and I think doing that and also a roguelite is very sensible, with roguelites being pretty easy to pick up and play, but also being a perfect pairing for early access because you can just tweak little bits of the formula to actually get massive results in the resultant effect of your changes on people's runs and gameplay experience. Now, overall, though, I think what you see is that this stuff is just the perfect pairing for the business model, the early access community building plan, their funding pathway, and of course the community partnership that they said they wanted to create. And I would say actually genuinely did manage to create. And yes, early access resulted in enthusiastic and impactful player feedback that genuinely made the game so much better. And I think that Steam 98% really is the hard proof of that. And even in early access, the game actually grew bigger than Supergiant themselves even expected. Now, of course, a part of that, oddly enough, could be that it was the very first Epic Game Store exclusive for its early access period. Now, that in itself would normally be seen as a somewhat limiting factor to a game's growth, especially early on. I would say, though, that this is a studio that has fans. Usually, people are fans of games, not studios. With Supergiant, I think people are fans of the studio. Now, you'll see why I think that it may have helped them in a little bit, but first up, though, that exclusivity deal obviously gave the studio a bunch more money, and it seems like that actually just gave them the time and the resources they needed to iterate and iterate and iterate. Yes, money talks, right? It's an Epic exclusivity deal. From what we understand, the money's pretty sweet. Now, the other thing here, from a user perspective that I would say, is the Epic Mega Sale, because they were on the Epic Mega Sale, and if you do not remember, that's where Epic basically just slashed the price of everything. There was a big sale anyway, and then Epic just took $10 off everything, and they actually paid that $10. So a developer could sell a game for, $15, right? They could reduce their game's price to $25, and then they'd sell it to $15 for the customer, and that difference, that $10, Epic covered it. It was a pretty incredible situation, and it brought Hades down to an extremely affordable price point, which I think, yes, meant that a lot of people will have felt like it was a good time to jump on, especially because the second you look at Hades, you do feel like, oh, that's worth a lot more than this epic mega sale price. So yes, that was all super successful, and the plan was, of course, to go to Steam Early Access once the Epic deal expired, and it did, and when it did, yes, they got their 98% approval, which is beyond incredible. And it does go to show you that actually these Steam launches of previously Epic Games Store exclusives are actually continuing to do well, like really, really well, which I think is an interesting thing. Certainly a situation where the initial Epic deal certainly de-risked the project and maybe gave them more runway in terms of like how long they could stay at that early access, and certainly it seems like that set them up to be just perfectly poised to capture mass market now that the game has decided to, of course, leave its early access period. And of course, that has also meant it's ready for other platforms, like, say, the Nintendo Switch, which is pretty sweet. They got their Switch version kind of, like, funded by, a whole bunch of stuff going on Epic. So, an interesting situation for them, one that's obviously led to an immense game. And really, to close this video off, there's not that much else to say, right? Like, this isn't really a review, this is covering what's going on so that you're aware of the story of this game. And that is the story of this game. Supergiant are bloody good at making games. This time they experimented on business model and mechanics, and that all turned out swimmingly, and now they're pretty much at the top of the charts doing incredible. So, I suppose GG to them for making an absolutely incredible game, and I've got to imagine that this is almost certainly their greatest financial success as a company thus far. At least I'd imagine so, given the amount of hype that this game is currently receiving. So, an interesting situation. That is it for this video. If you have been wondering what is the deal with Hades, then I hope you now know what the deal with Hades is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.